Hey guys, welcome into the Bear With Us podcast. I'm Jack. He is Frank. As always, we are going to be talking a little Bears football. Not a ton of news going on, but we did want to continue our conversation from last week and round out our grades for the defense. If you are curious about when we're going to do our grades for the offense, we already did that. We did that last week, so go check that episode out. We're saving the special teams grades for next week because we just there's going to be nothing else to talk about. No, I'm kidding. We're not going to touch on that probably. Frankie, before we get to those grades though, something big happened. Something pretty big happened and could mean a lot to the Bears and Justin Fields moving forward. Jalen Hurts agreed to an extension with the Philadelphia Eagles, signing a 5-year, $255 million deal, which included a $23 million sign-on bonus, $179 million guaranteed, and an average annual salary of $51 million, making him the highest paid quarterback in football. Before we talk about how it impacts the Bears potentially, let's start with this, Frank. Did you like the contract extension for Jalen Hurts? Does he deserve it? Does it make sense?
100%. And again, I know we'll maybe take a little bit more of a deep dive as to how it pertains to the Bears, but that is the roadblock in which you want to build your team. They drafted this guy in the second round. They had already had a quarterback. They sort of, they instill trust in him to really build around him, and they leave him, with no excuse. And you're sort of hoping that that's what the Bears have done with DJ Moore and hopefully getting some more linemen and such. But they put the ball in Jalen Hurts' court, and he brings them to the Super Bowl. So absolutely, he deserves it. He continues to ascend. And the funny thing is I don't think he's done progressing. Like I already think he's the best quarterback in the NFC. But there's still times in his game where I'm like, take late on that. Take late on this. A little indecisive. Like, you get that cleaned up. You're talking about, if he stays healthy and he gets some of that cleaned up, you're talking about a Hall of Fame type of guy because he has so much talent. But yeah, he's earned it, man. And it was funny because right when it happened, I want to say I was streaming, but I was talking to someone and I was like, I don't think there's another story arc anywhere near this. This dude gets, this is like a Disney movie story arc. This dude gets benched at the national championship game, transfers the next year, plays very well, still question marks if he doesn't go in the first, goes to a team that doesn't have all the faith in him, nothing but trade rumors for years until they finally pass up on the Justin Fields and all these other quarterbacks to say, you know what, this is our guy, we're sticking with him, and goddamn did it pay off. That's a dope story, man. I'm really happy for him. He's continued to ascend, and honestly, Jack, he just feels like the face of what the new quarterback in today's NFL is. He can run, he can beat you from the pocket, high IQ. You have to be this to be successful in today's NFL. And again, I don't put Pat Mahomes that he's an alien. He does things that no one can do on a football field. So before anyone's like, what about Patrick? He's the face of the league right now. He's just, he's on an alien. He's not on Earth. But yeah, very, very, very happy for him. I think he's earned it. I think they've done right by him, and I'm glad that it didn't drag out like the Lamar situation. So super stoked. I know a few Eagles fans that were very happy as well.
Yeah, I kind of led you a little bit, but yeah, I absolutely think he deserves it. I know some people were a little surprised that he was ended up being the number one quarterback. And if you think about some of the contracts that still have to come, he's not going to be the highest paid quarterback for very long, right? Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert still need to get paid. Very curious to see how those contract situations play out. But really think about some of the guys that Jalen Hurts leapfrogged. I think the number one guy being Patrick Mahomes, and Patrick Mahomes looks like he kind of took a hometown deal now, given what some of these other contracts have been coming out. But granted, I think $45 million a year will be. I think Patrick Mahomes will be able to live off that. I'm just saying. But I do understand it's sort of a respect thing, and Jalen Hurts, just the type of character he seems to have. Like you brought it up, coming back from getting benched in Alabama to going to start at Oklahoma. in the draft, I was hoping the Bears would get him in the second round.
I remember that. I remember that.
That was going on. And, there was a lot of things to like, but there was a lot of things he needed to improve on. But, like, from day one, like, he's just looked like that. There's a reason the Eagles felt comfortable moving on from Carson Wentz and not drafting another quarterback since, right? I think this is a very good deal for him, obviously. I think it's a great deal for the Eagles. Now we'll see if he can continue to, carry this team. It'll be interesting to see how these salaries do start to impact the Eagles. Because one of the things that the Eagles did very well this year was, use their depth. They've lost a lot of starters from last year's team, and they really haven't had a chance to replace a ton of guys. So we'll see if their drafting can keep up. I'm curious to see what this team looks like next year. But in terms of how it impacts the Bears, Frank, there's been a very clear linear path between Jalen Hurts and Justin Fields in terms of how their career started, the growth that we've seen from both players. We're looking at a potential huge leap for Justin Fields, or at least maybe we should be expecting one. How do you think this contract impacts the Bears? How do you think it impacts Ryan Poles and how he may look at, I guess, judging Justin Fields in his season this upcoming year?
It's always curious to me to know like how contract negotiations actually work on the GM side. I know from an agent standpoint and from Justin Fields' standpoint, that newspaper clip is going to be up in my workout room every single day. That's the number that I'm gunning for, because that's sort of the comparison. That's who, when you watch these guys play, they look like each other, right? So if I can have a similar ascension, that's the number. If I could be better than him, that's the number that I want. Or to leap. But just like you said, that being said, it's also tough to say because there are other quarterbacks that need to get paid. Who's to say, that Burrow gets 55, 56, and Justin, and this is just all hypothetical. So before anyone hops in the comments and like, look at these fucking Bears fans talking about the Super Bowl, let's live in a hypothetical right now. Let's say Justin goes out and gets us a ring next year. And you're talking about, does he deserve more than Burrow? I mean, like, he not only is a part of the ride, he is the reason that they win a ring. You know what I mean? Like, so for me, I say all that to say, I do think this is a baseline, not only comparison, but for both sides. If you can take that similar trajectory, this is how we view you. That's that bucket that we put you in. But there's going to be other contracts in between then. There's going to be a Justin Herbert contract. There's going to be a Joe Burrow contract. Who the fuck knows? I mean, I know Pat signed that long deal, but I do remember when the details came out that it says like every 3 or 4 years it's sort of scheduled to be revisited. So he'll continue to get pay raises as they go. And I feel like I'm missing one more quarterback that'll get paid, but you get my point. Like, I think it's the standard for now, and something for Justin to shoot for, and something that the agent is certainly gonna have stored somewhere when negotiations are brought up if Justin can keep ascending. But for me, I hope that Justin gets to a point where we're talking about Mahomes money. You know what I mean? Like, that's a good problem to have. If you can get to that point where this franchise feels like we can pay you to a point where we have to lose some starters on one side of the ball because you can make up for that, that's where I would rather be.
Right. When was the last time the Bears actually ever gave a huge money contract to a quarterback? Probably Jay Cutler was the last time.
And even with Jay, the thing was, like, he didn't even like reset the market. I know everyone went crazy with him of like, oh, he's the number one paid. They just front loaded the deal, and then the rest of the contract, he was like the 16th highest paid quarterback in the league. Right. So it wasn't, even then, it wasn't like, any of these contracts.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. I think it's a great problem to have. Obviously, just based off of from the outside what we've seen of Justin Fields, I don't think he necessarily is playing for the payday. It really seems like he obviously cares about football, which is how you usually get paid like that. When you really care about your craft as opposed to just getting paid. And I think the parallels between him and Jalen Hurts are just they're fascinating. They're very similar in terms of how they play. But we've talked about it before. we both think that Justin Fields might actually have a higher ceiling than what Jalen Hurts does. And Jalen Hurts is now the highest paid quarterback in the NFL. So, I think I like, again, we've talked about it this offseason. I like what the Bears have done in terms of trying to basically say, we're going to give Justin every weapon we can. Now, granted, there is a pretty big difference between where the Bears are at going into year 3 with Justin Fields versus where the Eagles just were with Jalen Hurts. Like, you can't really compare the two. The Eagles' offensive line, obviously much better. If DJ Moore and AJ Brown were on the same team, AJ Brown is obviously your number one target, right? Like DJ Moore would be a great wide receiver too, obviously. But Darnell Mooney, Chase Claypool, that's not really that doesn't really match up with what the Eagles have. And then obviously Cole Kmet, I would take Goddard over Cole Kmet.
Yeah.
And even the run game, like even the running backs that they had too, like Miles Sanders doesn't get a lot of credit for what he was able to do last year. I would have not been that upset if the Bears had signed him. I'm not going to lie to you, Frank, just to continue the parallels a little bit more. But I do think the Bears are putting Justin in a better position than they ever have before to say, show us what you got.
Oh, agreed.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. I totally agree. And again, this is what we want out of a team being built around Justin. We don't want to be going into year 5 and saying, like, do we know what we have still? He's already ascending on his own. We saw what he can do with his legs. We saw beautiful in year 1 and in year 2. Year 1, it was more like spurts of good throws. In year 2, you start to see it become more consistent. Year 3, you really want to see it all be put together. And to your point, it's you're starting to leave no excuses. Is the offensive line exactly where you want it to be? No, not really. Are the receivers necessarily right where you want it to be? Not necessarily, but we're in a much better spot than we were not only last year, but even his rookie year, with the continuity and coaching staff as well. So I totally agree. And I mean, I think the parallel really doesn't even stop with their with just their similar play style. I mean, you look at like how tough these dudes are. Like the hit. I mean, I remember playing the Eagles, and Jalen took a lot of big hits. The Bears are a great defensive team. They had a pretty good showing that night or that day, and you just see that from both. And they just have that like it factor. Like I know everyone wants to look at Justin's stats and box scores and yada yada, but when you watch him play, I haven't felt that way about a Bears quarterback since like early Jay Cutler, when you were like, man, this guy's got something. And then eventually you realize he didn't necessarily have the work ethic to do that. But like, what other quarterback in our life that we say like, wow, it's just the it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not even Bears history. Like it's looking right now, like watching Justin is how I feel about almost all of the superstar quarterbacks. Like,
yep.
I mean, fuck, man. You still see Josh Allen miss throws. Like, I hate that every throw is under the microscope for Justin Fields. I understand why. But like quarterbacks miss throws. It's about the ones that they can make. And you just think about like some of the ones in that, in the Packers game that he was making, like throughout the season, he definitely improved as a passer. And people who say that he didn't are people who weren't watching every single game and who were only looking at box scores or highlights, from game to game. Like, I hate to like gatekeep like that, where it's like you can't just look at box scores. Like, I understand you can only watch realistically one game at a time all the way through, right? Red Zone is great, but they miss a lot, and maybe I'm crazy. Maybe this is a conversation for another day, but like, I feel like there are certain teams that they just don't cut to. Like, there's certain teams they want to keep an eye on.
Oh yeah, for sure. Maybe
I'm crazy, but if you're not watching every single snap, every single game, it's hard to see that progression. And unless it's like a highlight throw, you're not going to see every throw that he makes. But I think the talent is there for Justin Fields, and I think just again the parallel between him and Jalen Hurts is what makes this contract extension fascinating, because he was also a guy who was thought of as a running quarterback who developed after his team really put emphasis and put, like they put, oh my God, I'm blanking on.
Put his pieces around him.
Yeah, they put pieces around him. They put, a focus on specific positions, and they got him help. And I'm not saying DJ Moore is AJ Brown, but that can have that type of impact. I think we can fully expect that. And I know what you're going to say. I know. He very similar stats to AJ Brown. I know.
But because the thing is, because I don't necessarily disagree with you, but we're looking at AJ Brown with hindsight right now.
That's
when
true.
He was in Tennessee, when he left Tennessee and went to Philly, and I was wrong about this. I will always openly admit when I was wrong. I thought he was overrated. I was like, I've watched him play, and obviously now you see it was more of a Tennessee thing than it was an AJ Brown thing, quite clearly. But I mean, DJ Moore hasn't worked with the quarterback anywhere near as talented as Justin. Like, he may be way better than anyone thinks he is, because the floor right now was like a low end wide receiver 1. And if he can just reach that, that's phenomenal. But there's a ceiling that we don't know what the ceiling is right now with DJ.
I think that's a really good point. It'll definitely be something worth exploring down the road. One other newsworthy thing that happened this week was the Bears have brought back Dante Pettis, which Frank and I had discussed a little bit in the podcast previously. Not saying, just saying. Maybe you listen to the Bear With Us podcast. You're not as surprised. I mean, I guess nobody was really surprised they brought him back. But hey, we called it first, right, Frankie?
No, we did.
Do you like it? Do you like that he's back? You like it? I assume he'll be their punt returner again, right?
I would assume so. I think it's more of a special teams thing, because he played gunner a little bit on special teams as well, on punt coverage. So I would assume that's going to continue to be his role. I mean, again, like guys like EQ, guys like Pettis, these guys who you're wide receiver 5, 6, that's good depth to have. Guys who have continuity, guys who can help, newer people come in and learn the offense, contribute on special teams. I'm all for that. And it's not like they broke the bank. I don't even know what the specific. You always know it's a really small deal when they don't announce the specifics on the social media, but it's probably a 1 year, $5 million or something.
What was the what was the game? Was it the Washington game where he had that nice like sliding touchdown? I think it was because it was one of those games where they were wearing just the horrific orange jerseys.
It may have been Washington.
So yeah, I agree. He's not going to be playing every single down, and if he is, that's obviously a huge problem. But I think he's also there to potentially give some competition to the punt returner spot. I don't know if I want Velus to be the punt returner, the every down punt returner, especially with some of the fumble issues. But Frank, like, if he's not punt returning and he's not playing every down as a wide receiver, what value is Velus really bringing to the table? So I think there's still that option there. But yeah, nothing too crazy there. But glad to have that kind of player back, honestly. Frank, let's continue on with our grades, and let's get started with the defense here, and we'll sort of go defensive line to defensive back. So let's start with the defensive line. Let me read off the quote unquote depth chart, the unofficial depth chart as I see it right now, and we'll kind of give our overall grades. So Trevis Gibson is your starting left defensive end, Justin Jones starting at defensive tackle, Andrew Billings, the free agent from the Raiders, and then Rasheem Green, who they signed from Houston, are your four starters as listed. Then you have DeMarcus Walker, the free agent from Tennessee, Jalen Holmes, who I think was an undrafted free agent, Andrew Brown, Dominique Robinson, the former 5th round pick, Terrell Lewis, who I believe was a former Colt, if I'm remembering correctly. I'll have to take a look at that. And then Donovan Jeter, no idea who that is, and Jerry Green. Jerry spelled Gerri. Frankie, this group. What grade are you giving this group, Frankie?
Before we dig into, I do want to say, I had some people that thought I was a little too generous on the offensive side with the grades, because a lot of mine were like C+, B-, B's in that range. And the reason was because there was a stretch from the post-Washington game up to, I forget which game it was, where that was an elite offense. Mostly due to Justin, but they were averaging like 30 points a game. They were going ballistic. So you got this glimpse of like, man, if you really support this and nurture what's happening on offense, you could have something elite pretty consistently. I say that to say I don't feel that way about the defense whatsoever. I think you could squint and see like 3 good games. It was the Washington game, the Niners game, which was in a fucking hurricane, and there was one more that I'm blanking about from last year. So on the D-line, Jack, it was very hard for me to give them anything more than an F, to be quite honest, because, listen, when we went into the year, we knew that Robert Quinn was going to be trade bait. But even while he was there, he wasn't very good. He's an aging guy. It is what it is. But who was the best player on the line? Justin Jones, probably?
Yeah.
And that's not saying much. I mean, he had some good flashes, but it wasn't like that way. He was consistently wrecking offensive lines. They couldn't stop the run. They had 0 pass rush. I mean, we were one of like 5 teams that didn't combine, or how did it work? It was there was a stat that they showed in the playoffs where it was like 3 teams combined still had less than what the Eagles had in sacks, and the Bears were one of the was like the bottom 3. It was gross. And like their hurry numbers weren't good. I mean, it was bad. Quarterback hits were down. So again, you can't stop the run. There was no pass rush. I do like the signings of DeMarcus Walker and Billings. I think that really helps to some degree in stopping the run. But again, who was rushing the passer? Because we came into last year of like, okay, Robert Quinn is here for however long. Can Trevis Gipson really step up? He's going to be the guy that if this defensive line is going to make any noise, it's going to go through him. He had a solid year the year before, and he just didn't continue that ascension. He probably is a rotation guy, and that's okay. But they don't have other pieces, to make that rotation guy actually shine. They don't have the guy. They don't have Will Anderson. They don't have Julius Peppers. They don't have a prime Khalil Mack. So without that, and then without someone that's wrecking things on the interior, they don't have a Tommy Harris. They may have a Jalen Carter in the next couple of weeks, but they don't have that. They don't have that absolute game wrecker that makes the rest of the defensive line better. We sort of talked about what DJ Moore does, even if he's not a wide receiver 1. People can say maybe he's overrated and he was just the only guy in Carolina. Fine, but he's still the best guy here, and that pushes everyone else down. Trevis Gipson isn't that guy, but if we get that guy, that pushes him down to be the rotation guy, and now he actually looks pretty fucking good. You know what I mean? Like, because he's coming in on 3rd and longs. He's coming in when it's just time to pin the ears back. He's not an everyday guy. And I hate that it sounds that harsh, but Jack, I started to harken back. I was looking at some of the games to refresh my memory, like some of the schedule, from the schedule of last year, and I'm like, I just remember quarterbacks sitting back doing their fucking taxes back there. It was gross.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I thought I was being harsh because I gave him an F-. But it sounds like we're kind of in the same spot, in the same ballpark. By the way, I should show some respect to Terrell Lewis. He is a Super Bowl champion. He was with the Rams, so
nice.
Not with the Colts. But Frank, he is wearing number 52 with the Bears, and I don't know if I like that.
Interesting.
I don't know if I like that one bit. But anyways, Frank, yeah, no, this defensive line is pretty abysmal. I wanted to give him like a D- just because of that they had, in my opinion, they have improved certain things. But if this is like, I looked at it, we don't know what's going to be added in the draft. We don't know anything like that. I'm going strictly off of if this was the starting defensive line, and that's sort of how I did my grades with the offense. If this group was the starting group opening day baseball, I'm thinking 2 different sports here, Frank. Week 1, how would I feel? How would I grade them? And I would grade them an F because this just isn't going to cut it in this league. Like, there is no pass rush here, like you were saying. Frank, one of the biggest things, right, for the Matt Eberflus defense is the hits principle, right? Turn the ball over, run to the ball, take the ball away, ball hawk, things like that. You know how many forced fumbles the defensive line had last year combined?
Wasn't it like 2?
It's 2. Mike Pennell, who's no longer on the team, and Al-Qadim Muhammad no longer on the team. Can you guess who else had a forced fumble last year, Frank? You can't, because it's Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet had more forced fumbles than all of the current Bears from last year.
You think he can play defensive end?
He might have to, because this group fucking sucks, man. There's absolutely, like, the safety is leading you in sacks. Justin Jones, I think he's a good player. He's not.
Same.
It's not. I'm not grading these players individually as an F-, but as a group, this just isn't going to get it done. Now, obviously, there's room to improve, but until we know what that looks like, I can't go any higher. Like, I like some of these signings, like you were saying, like DeMarcus Walker, but I like the Al-Qadim Muhammad signing last year, and it kind of feels a little similar, but obviously DeMarcus Walker is a little bit more versatile. But, like, we need big jumps, man, from Trevis or Trevis or however the fuck they want to say it.
Trevis.
And I guess whatever you get from Dominique Robinson is a plus.
Yeah.
At this point, you can't count on him to be a big part of the rotation. So until I see more, I don't know how you go any higher than an F. But that being said, I do like some of the signings they made in the offseason so far.
Agreed. And funnily enough, and we're getting to the linebackers. Yes. Yeah. Oh, perfect.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to continue.
No, I didn't know if you wanted to go corners first. I didn't know if perfect. So the signings that the Bears have made, I think, actually helps the linebackers more than it does the D line as a whole. As weird as that sounds, because you look at DeMarcus Walker, you look at Billings. Who was the other one? I'm blanking on the third signing.
Rasheem Green.
Rasheem Green. They're all good run stuffers. They stop the run very well. That helps the linebackers hit holes better. And that's what made me sort of elevate the grade of the linebackers, because I do anticipate that being a huge help for them. I also just think they upgraded literally every position. Edmonds, I think, is a much better Mike than Sanborn was. Sanborn may have been a better Mike than Roquan was, and that's no knock on Roquan. I just don't think he was built for the cover two. That's not what his specialty was. He's a 3-4 inside linebacker. And then obviously, I wrote why the hell did I write Edwards twice? The Will.
Tremaine Edmonds.
Edmonds is the Mike. Edwards is the Will. Sanborn is the Sam. I like that group. I like it a lot. I think the only thing that kept it from being any higher than a B is because I need to see it in action. I think on paper, you got a little bit of the Edmonds and Edwards have that like prototype of Lance Briggs and Brian Urlacher, but I need to see Edmonds more in the cover two. I need to see him play in coverage. But Sanborn, he has the skill set for me, because all they asked him to be last year was a tackling machine, and the Sam is exactly that. You know what I mean? Like, that's a perfect fit for him. Edmonds has the versatility. He has the athleticism to do everything. Edwards is the one that, I'm not as familiar with, especially in a cover two. But I like them. I like them a lot. And I think those defensive line signings, those run stuffers, are going to allow them to do what they need to do in that defense. And to your point, when we talk about Justin Fields not having excuses, talent be damned. Linebackers last year had excuses because the defensive line wasn't all that good at stopping the run, even though Sanborn was still balling the fuck out.
Which is how you knew he was a starter.
Right, exactly. But I mean, this sort of alleviates that. Like, now we get to really see, how good you are at this linebacker position.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna go through the depth chart. You already gave the top three. Then you have Dylan Cole, Sterling Weatherford, DeMarcus Gates, and Luol Deng. No, I'm kidding. Kuani Deng is how you pronounce that, I'm assuming. Apologize if I get that wrong. But yeah, Frank, I was gonna give them an A-, because I love this group, like how it was assembled. I love that Ryan Poles identified needs that you and I thought were pretty big needs. But I don't think we thought that was going to be Ryan Poles' his focus of free agency. But he obviously made it clear that was a big thing he wanted to get done. I'm going to go with a B+ for now because the depth, we're grading this as a whole group. Again, it's not just individual players. As a group, the depth of the linebackers does make me a little bit nervous. If there are some injuries that take place, this group could look a little messy throughout the season. Now, granted, the starters I think is great, but when Frank and I are talking a little bit later on in the offseason about what we can expect from this team in terms of realistic expectations, are they a playoff team? Can they make some noise? A lot of it, to me, Frank, is going to come down to depth. And I think that's something that gets overlooked a lot when fans are kind of looking at off seasons and free agencies and things like that. Because injuries are going to happen, right? That's part of playing football. It is what it is. But can the Bears withstand some injuries? And to this linebacker group, as it's currently assembled, I'm going to say probably not. So if we're grading this as an entire group, I can't go any higher than a B+. That being said, I love the starting group together. I think everything fits really, really well. And I think this is going to be a position where they absolutely are going to draft, whether it's the second round, maybe even the third round, again, for a little more depth. And because Jack Sanborn isn't a proven player, right? You want to make sure that, you have something to work with there. Because Sterling Weatherford and DeMarquise Gates, DeMarquise Gates, I believe that's how you pronounce that. If you haven't heard of them, you're not a bad football fan. It's because they haven't played. They have literally no stats. So I like the group. I don't love the group yet, but I like where they're going right now.
No, I agree. And that was really my only note that I made, is that they need depth. Like I literally have that written in all caps, needs depth. And to me, you target one in the third or fourth round, 100%. And to your point with Sanborn, could you be bringing in competition for him? Sure. And let's say you find someone who is better than him, then you have a backup in Sanborn that what you have. That's a phenomenal position to be in.
You have your Nick Kwiatkowski.
Right, exactly. 100%. So that is not the worst. I mean, that wouldn't be the worst case scenario by any means. That would be the best case for that group. Jack, are we moving to corners?
Yeah, let's go with corners.
Fuck yeah. You want to read off their depth chart? I don't have it pulled up.
Yeah. Okay. So, God, it's so weird. It has like it has the corners,
it does the left corner.
One corner, and then safeties, and then a corner. All right. So left corner, you got Jalen Johnson. You have Kindle Vildor is still listed as starter. Kindle Vildor, Kyler Gordon as your top three. Jalen Jones, Harrison Hand. I don't know who that is. Josh Blackwell. I know who that is. Michael Ojemudia, and then Greg Stroman Jr., who I believe Greg Stroman Jr. is also, I think he played at Northwestern.
I believe Greg Stroman Jr.'s father's also name is Greg Stroman.
You know what, Frank? You're probably spot on. But while we're talking, I'm gonna look up Greg Stroman and make sure I'm correct. Nope, he went to Virginia Tech, so I apologize for that. But he was
fucking throwing dirt on the Stroman name, you piece of shit. You take it back.
You're right. I absolutely. Oh, he actually played for the Bears last year. I forgot about that.
Huh.
He played in 2 games. Oh wait, didn't he have like a pick? Yeah, he had an interception last year. That's right.
Against who? Was this the end of the year?
This is blowing your mind, huh?
Yeah.
You know what? Go. Why don't you give me your grades? And
okay, all right, I'll give the grade.
The Greg
so
Stroman
this was one. I gave them a solid grade. I gave them a B, but it did feel like I was being a little bit harsh because I do think this is the most talented group on the defense as it stands. Jalen Johnson, once he got healthy, he got it together. He looked really good. He had a string of really good games in the second half of the season. Kyler Gordon made his strides. He had his hiccups like every rookie does. But towards the end of the year, picking off Josh Allen, making really good reads on the ball. He still got torched every now and then, but it is what it is. I think second and third years, which you really, unless you're Sauce Gardner, what you have in a corner. But the biggest kicker for me, though, was Jalen Jones has some games where you were just like, oh, that was Jalen Johnson who made that play. And you're like, wait a minute, wrong Jalen. Like, here's this guy plugging in, and he looked really good. He was an undrafted guy, I believe. So, his spot isn't guaranteed by any means. But he inspired me with similar confidence that Sanborn had, where it's like, even if you draft someone there, this guy's spot may not be gone just based off of that. Or if you sign someone, that doesn't mean he's immediately out of the rotation at corner. And even like, I know we're sort of sick of Kendall Vildor, but there were a few games towards the end of the year where you're like, damn, Kendall's even making plays now. Like, what's going on here? So I mean, the secondary really got it together, which quite honestly made me, not feel as harsh about giving the D line an F, because it's like, dude, if we had any sort of pass rush, you'd be talking about potentially an elite cornerback group because these guys are getting to the quarterback and allowing them to do their thing, but they just couldn't do it. So like any success was just purely on the corners. The reason why I didn't go any higher, and Jackie, you tell me if this is a crazy thing to think or I shouldn't be thinking this way, but we're seeing a lot of smoke about the Bears drafting a corner. We saw the ups and downs with Kyler Gordon. Those are duly noted. We've seen this. But the sentiment of, oh yeah, like we would kick. I mean, and he played nickel a lot last year, which I really didn't like, to be honest. You don't draft a second round nickel. Like I just don't agree with that, no matter how important that position is to your defense. I think that's asinine. The same way that like Eberflus, when he was in Indy and they asked him like, would you draft Roquan? Like he's like, I would be killed if I draft an off-ball linebacker. If I tried to convince them to draft an off-ball linebacker at like 10 or whatever it was. I feel the same way about a nickel. Like you can get those in the 4th, 5th, or even in free agency. Like the best nickel that we've seen in Chicago was probably Bryce Callahan, and he was like a 6th-round pick, 5th-round pick, and he was phenomenal. Like I'm not saying they fall off trees if they're just growing off trees, but like that's not a premium. The 2nd round should be someone who you come in and go. And to me, if you're drafting a corner, that's an outside guy. And so with all that, you're telling me that at 9, or if you trade back into the teens, that a corner is on the table. That doesn't inspire confidence in me that from the coaching staff that they have either. I don't know if it's Jalen or Kyler. Well, one of them they have to be shaky on if this is what they're looking at. And to me, I think it's Kyler, because they did kick him inside quite a bit last year. I don't know what the percentages were, but towards the end of the year, he was there about 50% of the time, or like it was the high 40s. So I don't like that, Jack. I really don't, because I did think he made strides and I thought he looked good towards the end of the year, enough to say, hey, we have our 2 outside corners. If we want to draft another corner, it can be the 4th, 5th round when you're thinking nickel. You know what I mean? Or if you're just comfortable to say, hey, Jalen Jones can be the nickel guy. Like he played really well at the end of the year. Let's give him a shot. Maybe that shouldn't have factored in my grades, but it did. It made me not feel as confident. Like if the coaching staff isn't, how can I be? How can we be as fans?
No, I think when you're doing these totally perfect absolute grades that carry a ton of weight, I think you definitely consider everything. No, Frank, I was having a little trouble. I'm not gonna lie. And just to give you the information, Greg Stroman picked off Nick Mullins in the Week 17 or the Week 18 game against the Vikings.
That's exactly why I don't remember it.
Oh, come on. We were watching every single second, just rooting for that number 1 pick, and now we have DJ Moore for it.
I was paying much more attention to the Vikings. Was it Viking? Or no, I'm sorry, Colts and Texans.
It was a wild, whatever. We're going to get down a rabbit hole. I don't want to do that yet. But Frank, I was having a little trouble with the defense, with the cornerbacks specifically, because, I mean, you just think about the growth that they had throughout the season, and you also have to compare it with the decline after Roquan was gone, how bad the defensive line was. Like, yeah, Kyler Gordon did get torched a couple times, but you also have to, like, think about in those plays when it was happening, how long was he being asked to cover NFL veteran receivers when he himself is still in his rookie season? Like, it's a lot to sort of compare back and forth. I really like the first, I don't want to say 4. No, I'll say I like the first 4 guys: Jalen, Kyler, Kendall, Jalen Jones. I can't believe I'm saying that about Jalen Jones, because there were some games early on where it was just like, man, are they trying to tank?
It was bad.
Like it was really, really bad. And you kept getting pissed because it was Jalen Johnson and Jalen Jones. So like you're like, what is Jalen Johnson doing? And you realize that it's Jalen Jones, and you're like, okay, that makes a little bit more sense. Why I landed on a B is for a couple of reasons. Number one, depth. That's a huge one. I don't love the depth of this group. I don't hate it. I don't hate the depth of this group. I actually think it's pretty solid. But Jalen Johnson just did not take the step that Kyle Fuller took. And I thought we kind of expected him to take. There was that game, I think it was against the Broncos. They play the Broncos? Am I making that up?
You're making that up.
Okay. There was a game where Jalen Johnson had where he was hurt, and we found out afterwards that he was hurt. But it was bad. Like, it was a real, maybe it was the Dolphins game. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. I don't remember. Anyways, Jalen Johnson he's a very important player to this defense. He's a very good player. I just don't think he's like a shutdown corner, number one. And I think that's a big reason why you're seeing mock drafts with Christian Hernandez or Joey Porter Jr. out of Penn State, like to the Bears at 9, or if they trade back, because this group isn't necessarily, as you were talking about, it's not 100% solved. And that's a big problem when you just spent your first 2 picks in your draft on defensive backs. Like, that's a problem to me. And granted, this team had a lot of holes that Ryan Poles was walking into. Let's not get it twisted. But there's still a lot of question marks. There's no way you can give this team at this position A. But I think there's a lot of upside, especially given how they closed out last season. Absolutely.
And that's exactly where my mind was. And the reason why I couldn't give them higher than a B either is that if they don't have that guy, like Jalen could be, Kyler might ascend to that. I don't think he's going to take that big of a step this year, just sort of where he started off his rookie year. But it's also hard to like separate the D line in the corners, because they go hand in hand in pass coverage, right? And but the thing is, I'm also like hearkening back to the 2017 Bears pre Khalil Mack, when they were getting coverage sacks. They were getting, the defensive line wasn't all that good. It was a top 10 defense because the secondary was that good. Like, they were balling. Kyle Fuller was balling. I think Prince Amukamara was his first year there. They had really, really good pieces. And I get it. The defensive line didn't do them any favors, but we've seen before in this city a really elite secondary, impose its will and make a D line look better versus the opposite. So again, D line didn't give them favors, but the corners didn't exactly inspire like, oh, this is elite. Again, me and you've noted they ascended, they started to look better. I think they took to coaching. The development started to happen, but B may even be a little bit optimistic. Like, people may look at that and be like, are you sure? But I think it's because we do think that these guys can still take a step.
I also think there's a factor of importance that you and I put into this position and kind of just overall with this defense, where, it's a B, but I don't necessarily look at that if I were to give the linebackers a C, I think those are kind of comparable, because to me, corners just aren't that important of a position in this defense. Like, the fact that Jalen Jones can come in and make some pretty big plays, especially towards the end of the year, or Kindle Vildor, who was a former 5th-round pick, can still look serviceable, I think kind of says it all. And it goes back to just the reason I didn't love the Kyler Gordon pick at the time. It's just a personal philosophy. So that's also hard to like cut the line of how I feel about the cornerbacks versus what value they actually bring to the defense. I like I said, I like this group. I just don't think it matters as much if they're an A. If this group is an A, how much does that really change the defense when your defensive line is an F, like we were talking about?
No, that's fair.
Let's wrap it up with the safety group. Jaquan Brisker, obviously your starting strong safety. Eddie Jackson is listed as the starting full free safety. Elijah Hicks, AJ Thomas, Adrian Colbert. Frank, I'll let you go first with your grade.
So the same what you said about the draft picks last year, that played into with the second round draft picks. That played into my grading of the safeties. Eddie Jackson looked a lot better. I think this system fits well, and they put him back in his correct position. So, but again, the one thing that was super impressive with him is that he really bought into this. Like, he was a veteran. He wasn't stuck in his ways. He said, "We're going to do this." And he looked really good. He got back to turning the ball over. He looked solid. I gave this group as a whole a C+, because you draft a safety in the second round when, I mean, you needed help at receiver, you needed help on the offensive line, you needed help on the defensive line. And you think of like how safeties impact a game in today's NFL. They're the last thing that you build, because again, like, you know, what me and you had said, like you picked a corner, which they needed. So I wasn't mad at that. Hindsight, you can say maybe they should have picked a different one or a better, you know, whatever. But like, we weren't mad at that. We were mad at the Brisker pick. But with the sentiment being like, well, he's a super safe pick. He's going to come in and he played well in spurts, but then you're also seeing him take bad angles on balls, take bad angles on tackles, miss tackles. And it's like, dude, if we're using second round draft capital on a safety, you better be elite. You better be Jamal Adams, you know, rookie season elite. And it wasn't that. It just wasn't. But he even to a bigger degree, the same way that you're talking about corners, Jack, I think you magnify that times like 5 with the safety. Let's just say he did step in and he was elite. What would that even do for this defense? Because he had, what was it, 4 sacks? I mean, he had some tackles for loss. Like, he made a solid impact. And what did that do? Nothing. It just didn't, because that's just not the way you build a defense. So like, that was a big part of the reason, you know, for the grade. I gave him a C+. I think the nucleus of Bojack and Brisker is a solid one, but until you build everywhere else, even if they were both elite, that doesn't do anything. So and the depth is pretty bad. As soon as Eddie Jackson went out, the rest of the safety play was pretty bad for the rest of the year. What did he go on, week 12 or 11 or whatever it was, and yeah, it was not good. And then Brisker had dealt with some injuries throughout the year as well. And you can clearly see the people behind him weren't even where he was at as a rookie. So it would not shock me, again, like a mid-level pick being a safety, or even like some veterans who get cut that come in for depth reasons, because they need depth there as well. But yeah, I mean, I had them graded as the second worst position group on defense.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I went with a little bit lower. Honestly, I went with a C. And a lot of that has to do with not being sure what Eddie Jackson is going to look like after coming back from a pretty serious injury. I like Elijah Hicks, but he's also a special teams guy, 7th round pick. Like, their depth at the safety spot, if Eddie Jackson struggles or is still just hurt overall, like, that's a problem. And Brisker, to what you were saying, I like him. I think there was a lot more good than bad last year for him, but doesn't really look like a superstar at this point. He looks like a playmaker. I'll give him that. He looks like a guy who can impact the game in a very positive way. But, you know, it's hard to separate our feelings in terms of, you know, like, correct me if I'm wrong. Was that the pick that they traded Khalil Mack for? I think it was. I think that was the pick that they the Los Angeles Chargers traded a 2nd round selection as well as a 2023 6th round selection to Chicago in exchange for outside linebacker Khalil Mack. So basically, and I know it's not as simple as this, but basically you traded Khalil Mack for Jaquan Brisker, and, you know, 2 very different players, very different time. I understand that, but I don't love picking. There's just, you look at this draft. Like, this draft last year was not great offensively, but there were a lot of good players that they could have had. You think about, you know, depending on what pick you use on a safety, like, take Kyler Gordon at 39, Kenneth Walker goes a couple picks later. Wan'Dale Robinson. Then you kind of go down all the way to Jaquan Brisker pick at 48. We've obviously talked about this a ton. George Pickens, Alec Pierce, Trey McBride, all the offensive linemen, James Cook, like all of these guys that you could have had, Jelani Woods, that could ultimately have put your team in a better position for your rebuild moving forward. Like, this is the problem, Frank. They drafted a safety and a corner as their first 2 picks last year. And guess what? Corner and safety are still in need this year. It didn't really make an impact. And it's kind of frustrating when you look at it like that. Granted, it's hard to like carry that over. That's not really fair, but I just don't like this group. Like, I like Brisker. I'm concerned about where the rest of this group goes. And that's if Brisker turns into anything more than just a good safety. He needs to be a great safety for this group to really rise up for me. I'll never grade safeties super high unless you have a Pro Bowler. And I don't know if Brisker is a Pro Bowl player. I don't know.
No, I totally agree. And that's why, again, I thought I was potentially being a little bit harsh, but it was also hard for me because I liked what I saw from Eddie Jackson, but then with him getting hurt, we don't know when he's going to be back or how well the foot's going to heal. Liz Frank can be a dirty little bitch. You know, it just is what it is. Those injuries are not fun. So that was also tough as well. If he finishes the season healthy and we're going in and we sort of had that same sort of ascension from that group that we did from the corners, maybe we feel a little bit different, but I don't know. Brisker was so boom or bust, man. It was either like an amazing play or like the most rookie boneheaded mistake that you could make out there. And again, that I'm not critiquing that. I don't want to make it seem like I'm judging him harder for his rookie mistakes than I did for Kyler, because Kyler had way more of them. But it's to our overall point is like, if you're going to draft a safety, this dude has to impact the game like Derwin James impacted the game. You know, when he was that young, when you know, guys like that. If you're not Tyrann Mathieu out there, you can't waste the pick that early in the draft for that, because you're not going to see much different production from a 3rd, 4th, 5th round guy either. Like, safeties have a pretty high floor in the NFL when you draft them. So if you're going to pick one early, they better be game changing, and it just didn't happen last year. But the overarching thing is, and this is why I say, like, I do feel like I was being pretty harsh. I think the only one that was very justified was the defensive line. They were bad at everything last year. We didn't see spurts of anything out of that group. The rest of them, we got a diamond in the rough in Jack Sanborn. The corners started to look good. Brisker, he was boom or bust, but the boom looked really good. Like when he hit highs, it was high. So going into this year, you think if you can add another piece or two on the defensive line, that starts to shore that up a little bit. I'm not saying they're going to be elite, because even if you get Will Anderson or Jalen Carter, this is not going to be an elite group still. They're still not there yet. But it alleviates something from this secondary and from these linebackers, right? Like it only continues to let them do their thing. And I hope that by draft time, we're in the position where we can start to analyze people a little bit better. Because again, like I was, especially for the corners, I sort of felt bad, because I'm like, dude, like I gave you a B. It could be a C, to a B in that range. But I'm also like, you didn't get any help at all last year. We've seen worse cornerback groups look way better because the defensive line was elite.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like, it's tough, man. It all starts in the trenches. So I say all that to say, Jack, I mean, we did this exercise to say, what we want to see Ryan Poles do with the draft coming up in a week, just about. And it's got to be the trenches, bro. Like it has to be. Yes. We need an elite offensive tackle, and we need, I don't want to say elite, because you're probably getting, if you go OT in the first, unless you trade back to recoup another first or like a very early second, you may not be dealing with elite prospects just yet, but you need a starting level defensive end as well, or 3-tech, one or the other, or both in the second.
You need like a Max Crosby type guy, like a guy you hit on in like the 4th round, who's just like, he was a good player in college and it just translated to the NFL. Like that's the kind of guy they need, like a high motor guy who doesn't just give up on plays. They need their Akeem Hicks. Like they need something like that. Last thing I want to touch on, Frank, before we get out of here, and it's in regards to corners. I literally just saw this pop up. The NFL, NFL.com, they posted pro comparisons for the top cornerback prospects. And I'm just going to read you the comps and the players, and I'm going to let you decide if you were Ryan Poles, if you'd use the 9th overall pick, if you'd trade back, if any of these guys, if their comps are accurate, if you would rather have that over an offensive lineman or defensive lineman as the Bears' first overall pick. So I'm going to start real quick. Devon Witherspoon, Illinois safety, pro comp, Jari Alexander. I'm going to let you list. I'm going to let this sink in for a little bit. Christian Gonzalez, the Oregon cornerback, pro comp, Stephon Gilmore. Joey Porter Jr., Penn State, pro comp, Xavier Rhodes. Deontay Banks, safety out of Maryland, James Bradbury, and then Emmanuel Forbes, Mississippi State, pro comp, Trayvon Diggs. Are any of those comps to you, if any of them hit their ceiling, any of them, are you taking any of them over your favorite offensive tackle, your favorite defensive lineman?
No, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it because to me, again, and that's exactly why I want to go offensive tackle in the first round. We have to push all our chips in on Justin Fields, and doing that, getting an offensive tackle continues to do that, because the names that I wanted to hear, I didn't see this list, was Darrelle Revis, was Sauce Gardner, was those types. You know, I mean, even give me like a Champ Bailey, give me something like that. None of those guys, and some of those guys had great careers, but they're not that. Again, if we're gonna draft a player that isn't an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman in those positions, and I have preferences as well. Maybe we'll talk about that before the draft next week. But if you're going to draft something that isn't that, you better be absolutely elite. And I know these player comps aren't, you know, what they're going to. It could perfect. They could ascend that. But I'm just saying, with the exercise that you gave me, no, I wouldn't take Stephon Gilmore over Paris Johnson.
I completely agree, and I hope our grades have sort of. Yeah, I hope our explanations of our grades have made that quite clear. Overall, Frank, I'd probably give the defense right now probably a C. If not, that even feels a little too high for I was going to say expecting.
C- overall. Yeah. Still feels kind of generous.
Right. That's what I'm saying. But I don't think it should be forgotten how good the secondary played at the end of last year, and also how improved this linebacker core really is going to be. It'll all depend on what happens with the defensive line, in my opinion. It's just, you know, it's tough because of how many needs are. It's not like the offense is a proven thing either. There's needs all over. So basically, if Ryan Poles trades back from the number 9 spot, please don't be surprised. And we'll give our final draft preview next week. That's what we're going to be looking to do. We're going to give our final positions that we hope the Bears go rounds 1 through 7, and just really hope what they target. We'll do that little draft preview next week. But until then, this has been the Bear With Us podcast. I'm Jack. He's Frank. Frankie, talk to you next week, man.
Later, Jackie. Later, everybody.
Everybody love everybody.